Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to PMI and the PMP exam, past, present, and future, with Mark Talbot and me. So, Mark, how are you doing today?
I am doing very well. How's everyone else?
Well, good, I hope. So, we've got a few folks on the call. We're going to go ahead and activate the chat so that we can get some chats. So, we have Angela, David, Johannes, and Prasanna on the call. And the purpose of today's webinar is to discuss a topic that lots of us have interest in, the PMI and the PMP exam, past, present, and future. But let's go ahead and do some introductions first. So, Mark, you want to go first?
Oh gosh. Okay, sure. Again, Mark Talbert. I am a PMP. Got my PMP actually way back in 1995. We're going to talk about that a little bit. We actually in December of 1995, when I sat for the exam, we were basing the exam off of the draft of version one, and this is how thick it was. So it was
Wow.
64 pages, but it was still a monster of a test, just like it's always been. And I've been actively involved with PMI ever really since that time. So served on the board with the Washington, D.C. PMI chapter, pretty much right after that time, served in a number of different capacities as a VP of professional development, helping put together courses, VP of programs, signing up
Wow.
speakers for dinner meetings and things like that. And I was trustee of the chapter from 2009 through 2013. So my career was kind of in the technical area, IT area. I worked for Hewlett Packard from 1980 through 2007. I left HP in 2007, took an early retirement package and decided, what am I going to do next? And I decided I wasn't ready to really retire, and I enjoyed teaching quite a bit. So I started teaching PMP prep classes right about that time, and I taught for some of the bigger REP companies like Velociteach, Global Knowledge for a little while, and then started my own company in 2010. I'm arrogant enough that I thought, I really would like to kind of create my own materials and do that. So it's worked out really well for me. I've been very happy teaching PMP prep classes since that time up to the present. So I'm not sure if that's going to continue. They're throwing such a curveball at us here now, and that's what we're here to talk about partly. That I've been an REP, registered education provider, in my company for about 4 or 5 years now. I guess it's 5 years, but I'm not planning to go the route of becoming an ATP, authorized training partner. They've increased the cost. They've multiplied it by four. Oops! And for a small mom and pop company like my company, that's too much. I'm just not going to get enough benefit out of being an ATP. But the worst thing for it, for me, in my mind, I'm very, very proud of my materials. I put a tremendous amount of time and effort into creating my materials. And the ATPs are going to have to teach off of their provided materials. And I don't want to do that. So I don't want to teach off somebody else's stuff. And I'm also not happy with kind of the direction they're going. Again, just as a quick preview for what we're going to talk about, but they're basically diminishing the importance of the PMBOK guide
Mhm.
for the test. So they're shoving it off into the background, and they've had this great, revelation that what they really should be doing is focusing on the ECO, the examination content outline, or what's also called the role delineation study. But that's only 13 pages, and there's not
Yes.
there's not a lot in there. So they had a company, Logical Operations, create a course based off that. And they've created 5 modules that basically roughly map into the ECO. And so the test is going to be based, and it's probably going to be evolving, it's going to be changing, but come January, the test is probably based quite a bit more on the ECO than
Mm,
the PMBOK guide. So I don't think come January that students are, you're still going to need to know the 10 knowledge areas, the 5 process groups, the 49 processes, but they're not going to have the kind of the tricky, nuanced, detailed questions that dig down into the ITTO inputs, tools and techniques and outputs. And it's
yeah.
to determine, we need to find out, are they going to need to know the tasks in the domains in the ECO or these modules? Are they going to need to know the
Mm,
tasks and kind of key outputs of tasks? Is that now going to become in focus? But from what I know about how the test is going to change, it looks like almost the amount of information students are going to have to wrap their arms around is
mhm.
almost going to double.
Oh my gosh. Well, let's hold on to that thought because we got a boatload of stuff to share today, Mark. So that was
Right.
my goodness, that was a very helpful introduction. So I'm glad that those who are here have gotten an idea of where we are going with our discussion, and that's Mark. And I often say that I'm just a baby in this stuff where Mark is concerned. So Mark is going to do all the work today. I'm just going to
No,
sit
no, no,
because
no.
I'm the baby. So I got certified 10 years after Mark in 2005. I worked for a number of companies like Citigroup, did a number of consulting jobs with firms like Honeywell, Motorola, Emerson, US Airways at the time, now American. And since I got certified in '05, I got very passionate about helping my colleagues, first of all, at Honeywell. So I started training even before I became a full-time trainer. Got a lot of my colleagues certified back in '05, and I found there was a demand for this. So I kept on, even though I was working full time, kept on contributing to the knowledge base of project management. And then 2009, you remember when the economy tanked, I had to reinvent myself for other reasons, similar to what Mark did in '07, but mine came early. I found myself without a job. My CEO called me into his office one day and said, Phil, I guess you know why you're here. I'm like, no, I don't know why I'm here. My boss just left voluntarily. So I thought, well, do you want me to fill his position? And he said, no, Phil, go to your office, take the box, pack your stuff. That's your last day.
Oh
I
man.
said, yeah. I said, wouldn't it be good to have known in advance? I have a newborn. He's like, well, wouldn't it be nice to know a lot of things in life? It's your last day. Sorry. So that was it. So for 9 months, I couldn't find a job. And while I was looking for work, I started thinking, you know what? Maybe I should just pursue this REP program because the PMI had this registered education provider. And like Mark, I had worked for a number of companies, one of them being Skillsoft. No Skillsoft, Mark. So
Yep.
I worked for them for a while doing PMP training. I thought, you know what, I should probably just do this because I first worked for Thomson G that was acquired by Skillsoft, and they didn't bring me along for the ride for too long. So I worked there for just a bit. And then my tenure at this gaming company suddenly came to an abrupt end. So I started training full time because I couldn't find a job. And I decided I'm going to train. So I started off like, okay, I'll do this part time. I'll still find a job. It didn't come for 9 months. So I just ran with it. And then client upon client came out of the woodworks, asking me to train them. And that's what I've been doing since 2010. Many different entities, the Army, the Air Force, NASA, the FBI. And I've been doing this like full time and very passionate about it, just like Mark. I thought I was bad. Mark is worse. So, like I said, Mark is going to do all the talking. But Mark, let's
No,
go
no, no,
back
no,
to
no,
our
no.
let's go back to our presentation for
Hey,
today. So
Phil,
let's start off talking
Phil,
about the good old. Uh-huh.
if you don't mind, I'd like Susan to present here too. Can you make her a co-presenter too, and have
Absolutely. Let's get
Susan
Susan
introduce
on.
herself too?
Gotcha. Let's make Susan a co-host. Yeah, she went for coffee. Are you back, Susan? Susan?
Okay, if she gets
Okay.
back, then we'll.
Yeah,
Hello? Can you hear me now?
yes, we can.
Yeah, I wasn't able to unmute or share my video. It wasn't letting me do. Here we
Oh,
go.
well, you're a co-host now, so there you go.
Okay. All
Awesome.
right. Good, good. Thank you. Do you want me to give you a brief introduction to myself?
Absolutely, Susan. Everyone would like to know who you are.
Okay. So, sorry, just in between meetings, making sure everything looks okay. So like yourself, I got my PMP in 2006. So about around the time that you did. So don't feel too bad that you didn't. Mark is the only person I know that has gotten it back that far. He's
The
the
old
oldest
dude.
PMP that I
I'm
know.
the old dude in
Not
the.
old by age, old by certification. So don't feel bad. So so I got mine. I remember my supervisor said, this is something you should do. And I had not heard about it from anyone else. It was like kind of new in that space. And I was doing DoD contract work at the Pentagon. I got that certification. And after I got it, I actually started hearing a lot about it. And other people I knew, other colleagues of mine were like, oh, I need to get that certification now. And I'm like, really? I already have it, So I was like a little bit ahead of the massive wave that hit the DC area where, I mean, I think that's one of the reasons that the DC chapter has 10,000 people, the
Wow.
largest chapter in the world. I could be wrong with that number. Mark might know better. But anyway, so with that, I kind of was on the beginning of that huge wave of everybody getting that cert. And then I found myself, I left the consulting business to go out on my own. And when I did that, I remember, you have this thought of like what it's going to be like to work for yourself, and then there's the reality of what shows up. So I thought I'd continue to do consulting kind of work. Well, it ended up I got approached by a university, Post University in Waterbury, Connecticut. So I started teaching for them, and then I also got approached by a colleague of mine saying, "Do you want to teach PMP certification?" And it had like never occurred to me to do it, but I'm like, yeah, I guess I can do that. And so I started doing it, and then I started doing it for a bunch of people. I've never had my company itself per se do PMP training, but I've done it through a bunch of other people. And Mark is one of the people that I connected with because his content's really great. And I actually went on to get ACP certification, RMP certification. I think I have 15 certifications now, 9 of which are agile types of certifications.
Oh, nice.
So one of the reasons for that is because there's these different certifying bodies, and different clients want different certifications from different bodies. And so I've just gotten as many of them as I can to try to be able to answer questions and give people the type of training that they want and they need. So I've gotten good at taking multiple choice question tests, which I actually hate as an engineer. My background's mechanical engineering, and I got my master's from George Washington University in engineering management. So engineers do not like multiple choice tests at all. So I find it very funny that I help people prep to take a test that I can't stand. But I think that probably makes me a good instructor because I can understand people's experience and kind of help them where they're at. I'm not sure what else I could tell you about it, but I was on the board of directors at the Southern New England chapter, which is Connecticut and Western Massachusetts. I served on that for, I want to say, about 3 or 3.5 years when I was in that area. And I also was involved in some like regional conferences, and I did some sort of leadership conferences within the region. Was pretty active in local chapters until I moved to Southern Eastern Delaware. So my closest chapter probably is DC. And I don't want to drive in just for meetings. I usually go in to be with clients and things like that. So most of my work is in the DC area or the New York, Connecticut, New Jersey area. So.
Gotcha. Well, awesome, Susan. That's very interesting. My goodness, 15 PM certifications.
I think so.
So from the, let me guess, the Scrum Alliance has to be there somewhere.
Yes, I do have the CSM and the CSPO. And then I have, so there's only 9 of them are agile related. One is from PMI. It's the PMI ACP. And then I have, is it one or two from the scrum.org? I have also the Scrum Masters through them. And then Scrum Study has their own versions of these, which are a Scrum Master, Scrum Product Owner, Scrum Developer, and then I'm a certified Scrum Trainer with Scrum Study. So that, and I'm probably missing one of those. There's another one that they have in there. And then the other certifications I have are in risk management. So my CASSP from ISC Squared, C-Risk from ISACA, Resilia from Axelos, which I think is more like English-based. And I might be missing one or two, but that's the idea. Basically, it's project management. I'm still actually working on some that I'd like to get. I want to get my GMP from PMI, and a few other agile certs. I do, I think they're valuable, but I would, to be honest, my driving reason to get them was to be able to teach them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But I also have found it be very valuable to have a bunch of them. That way, if somebody says, I want to get one, which is the best, I can tell them which would be the best for them based on what they want to do. And you really don't, unless you know enough about them, you really can't answer that question.
Exactly. I subscribe to that. I'm very similar to you. I have certifications from scrum.org, a couple from them, one from the Scrum Alliance, one from PMI. And it's important to be relevant. The thing I want everyone who's watching to take away from this is we are not agile averse. We are friends of agile. So when we come to present some of the information and things we're thinking, please realize that we're both in the world of predictive, very much so, and also in the world of agile, very much so. So this is not a one-sided perspective of people who are anti-agile or anti-predictive. But let's really rapidly talk about the PMI path. So I'll just run through a few slides to get you caught up to speed with PMI. So Project Management Institute, we know it's a nonprofit, supposed to be a nonprofit organization, which we guess it still is. Huge wallet at the moment. If you don't know of the PMI, go to pmi.org. The PMI has set standard for ethics in the field, which is why we are holding them accountable to a lot of the things that are supposed to be code of ethics from PMI. But PMI has done a phenomenal job over the past 50 years in putting project management on the map, putting different certifications on the map, many of which you've heard. The footprint of PMI is huge. I mean, right now we have over 500,000 members. Actually, if you look at the credential holders, well over 1 million. So at the time this was put together from easyproject.com, there were 500,000 members in 208 locations. There are a lot more people. You heard what Susan said, 10,000 people in one chapter. That's massive. In 1969, Jim Snyder of SmithKline and French Laboratories and Gordon Davis of the Georgia Institute of Technology had dinner in Philadelphia and agreed that there was need for an organization to offer project managers a forum for sharing information and discussing the industry. Later that year, Georgia Institute of Technology in Atlanta held the first formal meeting of the nascent organization. Afterwards, in Pennsylvania, articles of association were filed by 5 founders of the Project Management Institute. About that same time, PMI spent some of its resources on developing industry standards. This was done through the Professional Liaison Committee, which worked with the Technology Research Policy and Education Committees. Now, you saw what Mark held up a few moments ago. By the year 1980, these efforts were standardized into project management procedures and approaches. By the year 1996, Mark, can we take a look at that thing one more time, that draft, that copy one more time? And how many pages is that?
64.
64. So let's fast forward to around 2002-ish, 2003-ish. And this is what they call the 2000 edition. And this is just about 216 pages. After that, there was a 3rd edition. I don't have a copy of that, but there was the 4th edition after that. That's the 4th edition.
If you had given me a warning, I'd have pulled out the 3rd edition because that's the one I took.
You want to grab it? Yeah, it'd be nice to see it. Do you have it to hand, Susan?
Let me see if I can find it.
I have it, Susan. I got it right here.
Absolutely.
Hold on a second.
Thank you.
That's the one that I took, and probably yourself too, because I think we were like within a year of each other. Yep. That's it.
Yes, absolutely. Very good.
390 pages.
Lovely, lovely. So 390 pages, and moving on to the fourth edition, which is 467 pages. 467 pages. Wow. And then after that one, we have the fifth edition, which is 588 pages. And then the sixth edition, you got that, Susan, for sure, on your desk, I could guess.
I actually, after a while, I started to get rid of some of them. That's like I kept the one that I got and the most current one.
And the sixth edition, thank you for sharing all of that. And with all of that said, going back into the past from 64 pages to 756 pages. My goodness, what a journey.
And if
Now,
you add, Phil, if you add the Agile Practice Guide, which is
oh,
100,
yes, indeed.
so then you're
for
up
the
to about
reminder.
you're up to 950 pages
You
when you
know,
add the two together.
Phil, you need to get all those books stacked up and like get a picture of that with a measuring stick, because it's like, that's a lot. Look at that. You could end up at a chiropractor for carrying that around. So,
Can I
But
add
you
one
know
more
what,
thing?
Susan? Huh?
So one more thing in here. So when we teach our classes, and Phil, I haven't checked with you on this ahead of time, but I'm sure you're going to agree, and Susan too. So we start off our PMP prep class and we say, okay, I hope you have all picked up these books. What do you think? And you see people's eyes roll and you hear comments and adjectives and they go, yes, that's the driest, most cryptic, most abstract, most boring book I've ever read. And I said, yes, that gives me a reason in life, a purpose in life. I'm your interpreter of the PMBOK Guide. I'm going to provide some good examples. I'm going to bring it to life. I'm going to explain what the heck they really meant in a lot of these places, like direct and managed project work. Why is the PMIS a key tool and technique? What is that? And or why is it in monitor and control project work? And so we're explaining those things, which I don't really explain very well in the PMBOK Guide.
I recommend it as a cure for insomnia.
Yeah,
And
I say the
when
same
people
thing.
when people say it's dry, I go, oh, I guess you've never read a military spec. And mil specs are far more dry. But that I
Right?
think that is the only thing more dry than the PMBOK Guide.
The other thing
No,
we add is
no
it
offense.
has, and the other thing we add is it really has nothing to do with the real world or getting ready for the test. You do not, one of the worst mistakes you could make would be, how would we solve this problem in my company, in my job? No, this is not about how you do things. You just have to put on your PMI blinders, think PMI, and just absorb that whole framework and that
Drink the
culture.
Kool-Aid. Yeah, you
And
got to
now,
drink the
that's
Kool-Aid.
changing. Now they're switching. Again, they're de-emphasizing the PMBOK guide as they're moving into January when the
Mm,
tests change. So they're shifting focus to the
yeah.
ECO, the examination content outline.
So let's get there, Mark. We're going to hit there in a second because I
Okay.
know everyone came for that. So let's very speedily, I mean, people just want to know what is the future. We know what the present is, but let's finish the past. So let's go on to the CEO. So when you got certified around about then, probably Virgil R. Carter was the CEO. Do you recall, Mark, who was CEO when you
Yeah,
got certified?
no, we did meet Greg Balistrero multiple times. Since we're so close to Philadelphia, actually they would invite, actually Greg came and spoke at a number of our dinner meetings,
Mm,
and they would invite a good part of our board to come up to Philadelphia,
mhm,
King of Prussia area, and meet with them. That
mm,
all stopped with Mark Langley. So Mark Langley,
uh-oh.
and
So
he no longer rolled out the invitation to us.
yeah, but there was a flurry of these big, really huge PMI events when Mark came on, and that's when it just began to swell from like 250,000 people certified in 2005 to like going to 500,000 at the time Mark left. And then after Mark left in 2018, Sunil came on in 2018 till current. And that pretty much wraps up the story. So it's been a handover, if you want to say, of 4 or 5 major entities who were in the forefront. And there's a lot of drama which we won't go into regarding the past and regarding the PMBOK guide and regarding things that happened that we will not talk about here. But those who are in the inner circle know that the PMBOK guide has had quite a colorful history in some of the original writers of the guide, right, Mark? We won't go into that. We'll stay away from that. It's a landmark. Let's stay away.
Well, Phil, one of the things that I noticed in that 2010 plus time period, it went from being something people didn't know about to something people knew about to something people had to have if they wanted to get a decent project management job. And that to me was a huge progression in about a decade. And like I said, I seem to be ahead of that game by like a few years. But you know, by 2010, people were like, I don't know what this thing is, but I have to get it, or I can't do project management. I can't be a PM anymore. And that was a huge shift because a decade before that, it wasn't such a thing. So I think that's very notable because that's what got us to where we are today, where all of that growth, I haven't seen the stats, but I believe that growth showed up in that decade.
I totally believe that as well. So we'll stay away from the landmines because I'm sure we all have some perspective to share about how things develop through the different handlings of of the PMI to where we are today. But Susan is absolutely right. The growth in that decade, I honestly, Mark was responsible for a lot of growth. That's all I'm going to say. I'll just say he was responsible for a lot of growth. All right. So fast forward to today. All right. And of course, the team. No one does anything great without the team. So let's just say the team at the time, you know, and I don't know when you became an REP, Mark, but they were really hitting it out of the park way back, weren't they? I mean, in the earliest stages of the REP progression. But let's talk about the future because that's what a lot of us are looking to know about. So, Mark, let's start off. Susan, let's start off with your thoughts about version 7 and what we know about the exposure draft. So, Susan, do you want to go first?
Well, you know, I'm treading it lightly. I have some very real concerns. It seems to be the biggest change that I've seen. And my first exposure was probably the 3rd edition. And I think I've been teaching since the 4th edition. I'm concerned because I do understand integrating Agile into it and integrating Agile more into project management. But I also think that there's still value in traditional project management. And so I'm a little bit concerned about, you know, kind of watering down traditional as an approach, that Agile is better. I think they're different tools, and I always think of it as like a hammer and a screwdriver. If you have a nail, the hammer's better. If you have a screw, the screwdriver is better. So I don't think there's a better tool all in all. I think that it depends on what the situation is. Actually, Mark and I co-authored a book on hybrid project management with really just that purpose in mind, talking about that. My other concerns, they seem to have shifted from this whole process focus, and probably my biggest concern is the change to the exam, the change that that PMI is making with the materials themselves. And instead of registered educational providers having ATPs, any exam change as an instructor, I'm always hesitant. I was talking to somebody this morning, a student of mine, because I teach at 3 universities, and one of my students said, you know, what should I do with the PMP? Should I study for it? Should I take it? How should I prep for it? And I said, well, at this point, unless you're planning on getting it before the end of this month, I would kind of wait and see, because I don't like the unknown exam. I don't know any instructor that likes it, but that's normal. What my concern is the shift of not allowing REPs to come up with their own material. I've taught for a
Mhm.
number of companies. I've used different people's material, and it's not all alike. It's not all equal. And
Mhm.
when I recommend to people where to take a class, I push them towards a smaller business, because I feel like smaller training companies really have to do a lot to provide a good service and good
Sure.
content and good training. And I don't
Yeah.
see that with larger companies. So my concern with this whole ATP thing is that PMI is having everybody use the same material, and
Mm.
I'm not so sure how good that material is. That is probably my number one concern. But there is a huge shift, and I feel like the more I learn, the more questions I have for PMI.
Mm.
I don't get more answers, I get more questions. So that's kind
Mm.
of just to start where I'm at. So there's just I'm a risk manager. I don't like a lot of uncertainty.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I want to identify and manage the uncertainty. And right now I'm just sort of like, well, I guess I have to wait and see. So I'm not real comfortable, to be honest. I'm not real happy about that, but we'll have to wait and see what happens, you know?
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. I hear you. I'm taking my notes, and these are really great points. So just to reiterate, the concerns that agile people have this warped mentality that agile is better than predictive, failing to realize, going back to page 14 in the Agile Practice Guide, where we have the Stacy complexity model, there's no evil or good approach. It's tailoring the approach. And on the Stacy complexity model, you're always going to have stuff that is extremely predictable. You've got very low uncertainty, which means the requirements are certain. Why do you want to use agile? Like you said, why do you want to use a hammer for what you should actually use a backhoe for? There's some projects, they're just not going to go away except you use something substantial. And there's this mindset that process is bad, process is bad. Process is not bad. It's all about tailoring. So I took that away from what you said. And I also took away the fact that you and Mark, you co-authored a book about hybrid project management. When is that coming out?
It's out.
It's out.
What's it called?
It's called that. And so it's called Hybrid Project Management, and it's succeeding on modern projects using agile methodologies and traditional methodologies. So
Nice.
I think, for, as Susan said a few minutes ago, there's no one perfect process.
Mhm.
There's no one perfect way to do things. Um, and there are hybrid agile approaches. So you've got safe,
Mm.
and you've got disciplined agile, and PMI's purchased disciplined
Discipline
agile,
agile. Right.
and they're really investing in that. But the
That's the book.
agile is
Lovely.
a little bit, yeah, here's our book. Susan's
So we
holding
can
it.
get that on Amazon, huh?
Yeah, it's on Amazon, and it's in both Kindle and hard copy. And
Lovely.
we've actually recorded it too, but the
Nice.
ball's in my court, so I got to get that going, and we got to get the Audible version of that too, because the younger generation, my kids, that's my kids' generation, they don't read, they don't sit in the
No one
corner
reads anymore, right?
read a book like mom and dad do, but
Yeah.
everything's got to be on the phone, and listen to things on Audible. That's the way. So we got to do that. We got to get with it. Mark's got to get with it.
Yep. Yep. We'll
But
look
anyway,
forward to that.
there's no one perfect process, but so we're kind of off topic here, Phil. Kind of
So
going on.
no, we're
version
still on
7.
topic. So we're talking about the importance of hybridization, and I asked for the thoughts about version 7, and
Right.
let's fast forward into it, Mark. We've seen this before, Susan. You've seen this if you've been to PMI's website of late, and you can see the breakdown of the 6th edition to the 7th edition. So Mark, help me. You be the Energizer Bunny, because I don't even want to get started. Because once I get started, I never come back. Help us. You always sound so cool, calm, and collected and sensible when you're delivering your points. I'm all over the place. So
Again, we don't know. All we've seen is the exposure draft and a little bit of this platform where they're telling us what's it? I forgot the name of it now. The standards platform thing that
Standards
has a
Plus.
little more meat to it. But they're kind of ditching the 10 knowledge areas of the PMBOK guide, and they're moving to, so the 10 knowledge areas are kind of going away, or they're at least going into the background, and they're being replaced by 8 performance domains. And those 8 performance domains are team, stakeholders, lifecycle planning, navigating uncertainty and ambiguity, delivery, performance, and project work. So there's a lot there, and it all overlaps. To me, it's much more mishmashed. It's not intuitive. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Kind of starting out, if I've never met a senior manager, a sponsor that I'm doing a project for, where if I'm going to meeting with them, that they're not going to ask me, hey, Mark, when are you going to be done? And how much is this going to cost? And what are you actually going to get me? So what scope, what quality are you going to get in that time frame for that budget? So the 10 knowledge areas: scope, time, cost, quality, resources, communications, risk, and so on. That is so compelling and intuitive and makes a lot more sense. And I don't think also ISO has standardized on that. And I doubt ISO is going to ditch the 10 knowledge areas and move to this new structure. And I doubt that the real world is going to ditch, the triple constraints, which are now 6 constraints, right? Scope, time, cost, quality, resources, risk. The triple constraints are 6, but I doubt the real world's going to move away from that. And Agile actually fits into those knowledge areas quite well.
Absolutely.
The first thing you're doing
yeah.
in putting together, what's the first thing you're going to do in Agile, Susan? You're going to put together the product backlog. So, and you're going to start very high level with epics and features and stories.
That would be scope.
And then and then you're going to get some initial estimates of those epics, features, and stories, estimates of, so your time and cost, or relative sizing anyway.
Yeah.
And you're going to do those things. So that fits into scope, time, and cost.
You have release planning. Release planning is about scheduling. It's just high level.
Right.
Your cost for most Agile projects is fixed because you've got a certain amount of resources, a certain amount of time. So that you know what your cost is. That's actually usually pretty unmalleable, which is what makes it's Agile is a constant negotiation for scope. The schedule set, the team is set, which means the cost is set. So all your instead of, so the way I look at it is I actually look at that triple constraint, and with traditional, scope is fixed and we estimate cost and schedule, and we flip that triangle with Agile. We have cost and schedule fixed, and then we estimate our scope. So the triple constraint, to me, that's gravity for project managers. And I don't care if PMI gets rid of it. I'm still teaching people that way because
the real world's going to do it too.
It's just the most
because
practical way to teach.
Yeah. And really the 10 knowledge areas, the triple constraints and all that all fits into kind of project management 101. You're figuring out what is called the 5 W's and H: who, what, why, when, how. Well, that kind of does map, that's basic. And that maps also into the 10 knowledge areas. Agile maps into that. It's far more intuitive to me. And, frankly, I'm never going to impress a sponsor, a financial person, a senior manager by telling, hey, we've had this revelation and we're switching off of processes and now we're going to principles. We're going to these new principles and domains. They're going to say, frankly, Mark, I couldn't care less. When are you going to be done? And what's this going to cost?
Yeah,
absolutely. And it's on page 91 here. There's a correlation between the knowledge areas and how Agile works in those knowledge areas. So when I see this departure from it's like fighting against gravity. It's just, there's no sense in it. So I totally agree with what you said, Mark. The 10 knowledge areas and the 5 process no matter how you try to sugarcoat it and say,
Yeah.
oh, we're just moving them into the background, they're going to be in standards plus. Think about it. Doesn't it concern anyone that this book of 756 pages is suddenly going to be cut down by
Right.
500 pages?
And
Not
Phil, it's
crazy.
worse than that. I mean, those 10 knowledge areas have pretty much existed intact for over 20 years. So even in this draft, there's 9 knowledge areas here, but you basically got the same stuff. So what
Yeah.
happened between this 64-page document and our over 900 pages of the version 6 and Agile Practice Guide? What happened? What changed? And what's the real problem? The
Yeah.
problem was that it just got bloated and blown away with ITTO. So if you go back to, I mean, as you went along in your progression of PMBOK guides, and we saw the volume of the PMBOK guides swell up to, from 500 pages to 750 pages and so on, the ITTO also started exploding. And in
That's true.
version 5, I think there's something like 590 ITTO.
Oh my
Well,
God.
guess what? In version 6, if you add all the little bullets that go under things
bullets.
like data gathering tools, data representation tools, personal effectiveness tools, if you add all those bullets under those what I called umbrella tools, you're up to a whopping 1,400, more than 1,400 ITTO. And my students in my
gosh.
class, there's just no way. So I'm teaching a 4-day class, maybe a 5-day class. Their eyes are rolling, they're glazed, and they're saying, how can I assimilate all the stuff? And a lot of this stuff, is it really that key? Do you really need to know what influence diagrams are? Is that part of the toolkit? Is that germane for everyday project management, or a bubble chart, or even Monte Carlo? So Monte Carlo has been around forever. We've been teaching that forever. And forever, I've been asking students in class. So I'd always say, we get to that part in develop schedule where we're talking about simulation and Monte Carlo or quantitative risk analysis, and we're talking about it. And I'll say, okay, hold up your hand. How many of you have used Monte Carlo in your projects? And I've taught thousands of students over these 12, 13 years. I've taught thousands of students. How many have raised their hand?
Not many.
Like
Unless you
50.
taught any students in NASA. I know NASA
So,
uses
and
it.
it's census. So Susan and I both teach at the Census Bureau, and I've got a lot of statisticians at the Census Bureau. So I probably had 15 students raise hands. Most of them were at the Census Bureau.
Yep.
It's funny.
Actually, they used it. They would use it for project selection, for modeling and trying to figure out what project's going to have the most ROI, but they rarely used it in quantitative risk analysis for trying to figure out what contingency reserves should really be. But anyway, there was all these arcane, very, specialized type things. They weren't really part. So PMI could have, that was their problem. They went wrong with there's no need. What is the PMBOK guide supposed to be? It is not supposed to be a menu of how to do a project. It was never, ever, ever intended to be a menu or a methodology of how to do a project. And that's why it's so cryptic. That's why it's so generalized, because it's meant to support all projects. And they meant all. They meant all projects in all industries, no matter what type of contract, whether we're in fixed price, cost reimbursable, time and materials, what. It was supposed to support it. And so it was all things to everybody. And that's why it was so abstract and generalized. But if it's a framework, what 750-page document is a framework? So they needed to put this PMBOK guide on a diet, a severe diet, and get it back something closer to version 2.
Exactly.
2000 version or this.
It's funny you should say that, Mark, because the latest version of the Scrum Guide is shorter than the previous version. So the Scrum Guide 2020 just came out, And I was talking to somebody about it this morning, and I said, you know what? Somebody once said, if you want me to give you documentation, I can give you documentation. If you want it to be brief and to the point and short, it's going to take longer.
Yes.
Right. So it's it's like that whole idea of lean. I'm like, why don't you get a cup of Agile when you're working on your book and employ some of that lean to just add it up and make it bigger, bigger, bigger. I don't agree with that. I think that we need to simplify things, but I'm also a person, as an engineer, I like to take complicated things and make them simple.
Exactly.
There are many people in the world, especially in the world of consulting, especially in the federal government sector, where people take simple things and make them complex.
Yeah.
Not to be mean, but Congress does a really good job of taking simple things and making them complex. If we take complex things and make them simple, I mean, as an instructor, that's what's workable. And I look at the Scrum guide, look at how long that is, and look at the PMBOK guide. And so, to me, we can take some things out. There are too many inputs, outputs, tools, and techniques, things that people don't use. I agree.
But they don't need to swap out the knowledge areas. And the knowledge areas were fine.
Yes.
And again, I think they're a lot more intuitive. They're a lot more basic. What they need, where they went wrong was with this massive multiplication of ITTO that occurred over the 15, 20 years. And a lot of that is not germane and stuff. Like I said to Phil, when we were trying to put this together and talk about this, I'm afraid that PMI is creating with version 7, and also even by switching the emphasis away from the PMBOK guide to the ECO. So it's not just happening with version 7, it's happening now. This is going to happen in January with the test in January. They're shifting the focus to the examination content outline. And I think this could very well end up being new Coke. They're switching off classic Coke, they're going to new Coke, and this is going to boomerang. This is gonna,
it's not going to be good.
I've had many conversations about that it's a wait and see, but I would not be surprised. And I don't know that they will say, hey, we made a mistake, but we'll see some things shift. And I'm actually kind of hoping so, because I'm a very organized person, except if you look at my desk right now, it may not occur that way. But I'm a very organized person, and I agree these knowledge areas are key knowledge areas, and you do need to have understanding of the different knowledge areas. I have no problem with those processes. I have a problem with adding inputs, outputs, tools, and techniques every time somebody takes a look at it. I think that could be too much.
Yeah, every new author, and there's millions of authors wanted to get in. But guess what else they're scrapping? So I glossed over this too quickly. They're not only diminishing or de-emphasizing the 10 knowledge areas in the PMBOK guide. Guess what else is being mothballed or put away? The 5 process groups.
Isn't that crazy?
That really doesn't make any sense. The 5 process groups. What's the precursor? What's the foundation of the 5 process groups? The plan, do, check, act loop. I mean, they map perfectly. And guess what? Every major proprietary quality methodology is based off the plan, do, check, act loop. It is vital. It is, so involved in every quality methodology. To jump that is nuts.
I use the 5 process groups to teach people who know traditional project management about Agile. So let's say you take a Scrum project, you've got a 2-week sprint. Well, guess what you do? You initiate the sprint, you plan, you then execute, you got your daily Scrum. Monitoring, controlling, you also do that in the daily Scrum. And then at the end, you do your closing, which is your retrospective, and your iteration review or your sprint review.
Exactly.
To me, a sprint is a 2-week project. And it has those 5 process groups. So to eliminate them, I'm like, I'm not eliminating them because I'm a pragmatist. Okay, I'm going to use what works. And I know every project I've ever done, whether it was 1 week long or 1 week long iteration or a 2-year long project, I've had initiating, planning, executing, along with monitoring, controlling, followed by closing. And that's just how it works. And if
Mhm.
I just can't even, I can't imagine not putting my head around that. That's such an
Agile.
important thing.
Agile to me, and we say this in our book, but agile to me, one of the beautiful things in agile is it's taking that plan, do, check, act loop and it's speeding it up. All these interactions, all these, what does extreme, what does XP do to all those interactions between the different stakeholders? It just multiplies it. You've got pair programming at the most basic level. You got pair programming where there's feedback in seconds. And then you've got continuous integration. You're checking in code multiple times a day. That's happening in hours. You've got a daily stand-up meeting. You've got review meetings. You've got a review at least at the end of the iteration, but oftentimes even more often than that. So you're taking these feedback cycles, these feedback loops, these interactions, you're speeding that up. And that's just huge for increasing your chances for success, especially in our modern world where the world is just changing so fast, it makes your head spin.
Absolutely. And we got a question as a follow-on to this great point that you both raised. And it's from Johannes. And it's given that the new PMBOK guide is about to be realized in the project mode, I'd really like to know what type of project development lifecycle had been chosen. If it was an agile one, why didn't we get a PSI or an MVP? Why weren't we asked to read, correct, or validate increments of it? Videos about the content don't allow us to validate your work appropriately. This is a brilliant comment, Johannes, because what they've done is they've put this so-called webinars, such as the link I put in the comments, to tell you what's coming. It's like dictatorship. You know, we got all those what do you call it, decision-making techniques. This is pure dictatorship. They're just forcing it on you. So what do you folks think? What kind of development approach, if any, was used for this? What do you think?
My opinion, one that did not entail the use of listening to and working with stakeholders.
It smacks.
You know, from version, what was it? Was it version 5 or was it 6 where they started? They added the knowledge area of stakeholder management.
Yes,
Well,
5.
why not use
Yeah,
that?
5.
Why not use that? I mean, you drive me crazy with it. like, how can you not ask us what is the impact? We're in the foxhole, you know.
Mhm.
Mark and I and you, Phil, we're in the foxhole, and you're not talking to us. Maybe you should, like, you know, try your own soup while you're cooking it. You know.
Hello.
Yes.
Absolutely, Susan. And
I
a
don't
lot
get
of people think that I'm against PMI. I love PMI, but we need to hold them accountable so we
Yeah.
don't all go down the drain. It's like the death march. You know, the IBM death march as depicted by Apple in the 80s. It's like walking everyone off the cliff, like that advert
That
of
was
theirs,
an amazing ad. I remember
wasn't
that
it?
ad.
That's how I see PMI lining us up, walking us off the cliff. It's just not acceptable. I mean, Mark, what do you think about this development approach?
Well, they definitely didn't do that. You're right. And gosh, I don't want to get into trouble. I've never been
Let's
real.
do it.
I've never been real politically correct, but
Me
I
neither.
feel like and I am on the older end of the equation. You can see that stuff.
I
But
am
feel like
too,
in
but
those
I
good
use
old days-
technology. I
I
would
feel
be
like in
if
the
I
good old days, there was more interaction between what we call GOC or Global Operating Center, so global.
Mhm.
I felt like there was more interaction and more feedback between the chapters who was feeding information back to global and vice versa. And I feel like that is attenuated. That's diminishing too. And I think that's wrong. And I think that's sad that things are going that way. And I could say a lot more, but I won't. You know, just
Well, we're gonna get it out of you, Mark. You can't escape. We're gonna get it out of you because I know there's more to come. But let's take another question. This is from Daryl. It says, with the changes happening with the new exam, the 7th edition, and encouraging agile, will the PMI ACP certification be at the same level as the PMP?
That's a great question. And I think there's a lot of confusion there. And Daryl, it even goes farther than that because they're pushing disciplined agile. very, very hard. They've just introduced a new, I forgot the name and I have to dig out the email, but there's another new Agile certification they're
Yep.
pushing and
There are
stuff.
4 of them.
So
Four.
it's just become very mishmashed and confusing. And why should we why should we go, or should we still go after the ACP and stuff? And I've said this to Susan, I think I said it to Phil. For me, now this, you're not going to like this. This sounds over the top in my world, but I would ask you, and I think most of you here on this call are PMPs, yes? And I would say, what is there in the RMP certification that a PMP shouldn't know? Risk is vital to project
Yeah.
management. Susan also co-authored a book about risk, and one of the authors, I'm not sure if it was Susan or one of the others, put it brilliantly, and they said, project management in a lot of ways is really about risk management.
Absolutely.
And I would say there's nothing in the RMP that a PMP shouldn't know.
Mhm.
And I would say the same thing for Agile. For me, there's nothing on the ACP that a PMP shouldn't know. You should really know all of that. It's just vital for today's world,
Yeah.
for our modern world. But they're paying us these big bucks. Ha, 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 ha. That was a joke. But they're paying these big dollars to project managers to figure it out. What, as Susan was saying, what tool is best suited for what situation, what methodology? And there's nothing in the PMBOK guide, and there's very little literature anywhere that helps project managers figure out what methodology is best suited to a certain situation. So Susan and I tried to go after that in our book on hybrid, and we're trying to explain where we think the different methodologies and how you use them together, how you use them in a large complex project together. That's difficult. By the way, most agilists don't like that. Most
Yes.
hybrid.
Well, let's call them Puritans. Let's say the Puritans and the Zealots.
I call them scrumdamentalists.
And one of my favorite, I love Jeff Sutherland. I think Sutherland is awesome.
I love him.
His book on Agile, Scrum, The Art of Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time, is brilliant. And I think it's one of the best books on Agile. But guess what? Jeff hates hybrid. He wants to pull out the cross and hold it up. And he said, if you try to do hybrid, it's almost guaranteed failure. So I think.
Well, let's be honest, Mark. It's all about people's perception of what hybrid is. Right. Like people have made some really bizarre structures that are really waterfall. And when I say waterfall, we're not just talking about the processes and how they're interwoven. We're talking about people leading in a draconian type of way and not letting the team decide what to do. If we talk about the fundamental principles of Agile, you could take those and you could be comfortable in any hybridized setting as long as you follow the rules. Follow the rules, the 12 principles and the mindset. But, I think
you're right. I think what people don't like about hybrid Agile is it's a name that people call it when they haven't made a definitive decision about how they're going to deal with things. And, it becomes Scrum or Fall, or what did you call Scrum or Fail? That's what Mark says, Scrum or Fail. And, it is not a buffet where you go and say, hey, I'm going to get like cake and Jello, and I'm not going to eat salad. I'm not going to get broccoli. Like that doesn't work, but when you say definitively, okay, this part of the project, we need to use traditional project management for, we have known scope. We have known requirements. We know what we want to do. We know how long it will take. These other parts, we don't really know. Or maybe we have some regulatory requirements, the federal government or other regulatory, healthcare, highly regulated, even insurance companies have a lot of regulation, financial institutions have regulation. So they can't just say, okay, let's just do Agile and throw out traditional. So it's like, I highly respect Sutherland. I highly respect him. Yeah. And he's like, go Scrum and never go back. And I disagree with that. I think that there is a right mixture, but I think you need to be intentional about it. You can't just say, oh, this is like a bastardized version of Agile because we didn't know how to do it right. Okay, well, that's not going to work. I don't agree with that.
It's very simple. So Susan, let's talk about this because of course the Stacy complexity model is a staple. So we have things that are close to certainty, right?
Yep.
And we have things that are far away, far from certain. Is it wrong to be in this domain if you have requirements that are close to certain? Is it
Yep.
bad? Is that a bad thing? And let's say there's a trajectory somewhere along the line, you are more towards the certain than the uncertain. Is
Yep.
it bad to be somewhere towards certain, but not completely, to be more predictive over here?
And no, in fact, if you take a project where you have a high level of certainty and you try to manage it using an agile approach, I can almost guarantee you will use more resources and take more time. It's not for that purpose.
It's not needed. It's
I
overkill.
can use a hammer to get a screw through the wall, but I'm going to use a lot more resources. It's not going to be pretty. I can do it, but it's not the best. It's not the best tool. So why do that? Why?
Exactly.
Why we have all these great tools? Why not use them appropriately? That's where the wisdom is. The wisdom is, what tool do I apply in this situation? That's what creates wisdom. It's not having a tool and cramming it into something to be a solution.
Yeah.
So
I don't know. This is part of my frustration when people think predictive is evil, it's bad, it's unwieldy. There are going to be some projects where you should use a predictive method.
Yeah.
It's like what Susan is saying. Why won't you use what is best tailored or best fit in the job?
Right.
And PMI, they do not seem to get that. I mean, it's on page 14 of their own book, the Stacy complexity model, even though they've tried to kind of camouflage that it's the Stacy complexity model.
Yep.
We know it is.
Yep. And and getting back to Daryl's question, here's the challenge. They've added discipline agile. I have a PMI ACP. I still teach PMI ACP. I teach a significant amount of it. I don't know where that fits in with discipline agile and the new PMP exam, which includes a lot of agile. I'm like, seems like they're squeezing the ACP out. Like it seems like they're no longer relevant. And in my opinion, the ACP is one of the best agile certifications you can get because you learn a little bit about all of the different agile methods. It's not just Scrum.
Right.
And I think gives you a good lay of the land. What's an agile approach? All those other Scrum certs they have, they're just about Scrum. They don't teach you about Lean. They don't teach you about XP.
It's also grown very nicely in the time since it's come out. So there's over a million, there are over 1 million PMPs today worldwide. And then their next most popular certification is the CAPM, so Certified Associate in Project Management. I think there's 40-some thousand, 50-some, about 50,000. But the ACP is closing in on that. So there's over 30,000 ACPs. Are they going to throw those people overboard? Are they going to say, sorry, we kind of made a mistake with the ACP. We want you to go after XYZ now. Are they really going to do that?
Mark,
I hope not, Daryl. But the picture they're giving us, Daryl, is a little confused.
So Mark, help us to understand the past. Were there instances where they tried other certifications that didn't work, similar to what they're trying to do now? Do you recall any of those?
No, but I can tell you, here's an interesting thing. Right after I got started in the DC chapter and got on the board, so this is probably 97, 98. So a new CEO, and I had to go look up his name, a new CEO of PMI came in, and he basically wanted the PMP to be what is today the PGMP. And he basically was saying, no, we're only going to grant the PMP to project managers who have direct reports. You have to have people working for you, and you are their direct report manager and stuff. So basically, this is even beyond strong matrix.
Yes.
And there was such a revolt There was
Oh my.
the chapters went ballistic at the time. Now it was a much smaller membership in PMI at that time, but there was such a revolt that he was forced to resign.
Oh my goodness. But Mark, this brings up a very good point. Don't we see the amount of havoc one person could do? Because I believe that this move in the seventh edition is not, of course, it's not the mass populace. There's no consensus. It's a select group of people who came up with this brilliant idea and decided to
White
force it
ivory
on over a
tower.
million.
And they're academics, it seems to me, and again, I'm not being charitable and I'm probably not being fair, but here I am. And it seems to me like it is coming out of academia. It's white ivory tower stuff that doesn't play in the real world.
Oh my gosh. I mean, just looking at the senselessness in trying to force project managers to use principles as a base. We all have some ideas, of what principles are, even without coming into the PMI. Why should they make this a principles party?
And it's already there, and they're mixed in tools and techniques, they're mixed in concepts in the existing structure. They're not inventing anything new. Look, project management there's nothing new in project management. There's nothing that, hard to understand about what our job is. It's a very hard job. What you guys are doing is a very difficult job because you're in that classic situation where you're not given, I don't care who you are, what type of level of authority you've been given as project manager. You're that very empowered person in strong matrix. Guess what? You have key stakeholders that outrank you all over the map. So you're in a large complex project, your sponsor, the customer, partners, other senior managers, perhaps they outrank you. And the difficulty is you've got to bring them together somehow, some way. You've got to get these people on the same page regarding requirements, scope, and quality, regarding key constraints. And that is difficult. And I've been to a lot of dinner meetings, believe me, over 20 plus years at the DC chapter. I've heard some amazing presentations on different topics, and some where projects went dreadfully wrong. We brought in a high-level DoD program manager, Dr. Stephen Meyer, who talked to us about the F-22. He talked to us about the Abrams armored vehicle. He actually had a list of about 10 weapon systems. Every weapon system was more than $1 billion. That was with a B, more than $1 billion over budget, and more than 2 years, past schedule. And the problem, Dr. Meyer put it, is, well, we had some very powerful stakeholders. And some were pushing for bleeding edge requirements and pushing for all this stuff, and we just could never get them all together. You Brits, Phil, are trying to deal with Brexit. Are you ever? And politically here, there are just so many. I mean, you got very difficult, powerful stakeholders trying to get things done.
True, absolutely. It's a good way of looking at it, because when you look at our military, and I know you do Census Bureau stuff, Mark. I mean, have you spoken to those guys? What are they thinking about? Do they know about what's coming down the pike? What do they think?
Oh, yeah, and that's a difficulty for PMI too. The federal government seems to be shifting focus. So they're moving away, at least internally, from demanding their project managers get the PMP.
Oh my
They're
God.
now focusing on something called FAC PPM that is only available to federal project managers. They're still going to require their consultants, and they were going to want their consultants to get the PMP, but for their own internal people, they're moving away from that to, again, this FAC PPM.
Which is a little odd to me, because it's kind of like saying, hey, let's have the federal employees speak Spanish and the contractors speak French, and then they can all work together on projects. It doesn't seem like that makes a lot of sense. Seems like we should all be.
We need to be cognizant of our attendees' time.
Yes, we do.
And probably try to bring this to a conclusion.
Absolutely.
Does anybody have any last questions for Phil, Susan, or me, or the whole group, is there anything that we could kind of wrap up on?
Yeah, so let's wrap up really quickly, Mark, because you raised some good points. We're going to have to come back to this. We had two great questions, but then we also have the ATP materials outline. So to add further confusion to what's going on, the PMI have come out with their ATP materials. Mark, you want to really rapidly cover what's on the screen and what it is?
There's a lot to talk about on this, so I'm just going to do it at a high level here. So these 5 modules that you're seeing here now make up the organization of the structure of the ATP courses. And so they map these 5 modules into the ECO. So the ECO, the examination content outline, is made up of 3 domains: people, process, and business. And there you see on the right-hand side of the slide, Phil's showing you the breakdown of questions between these. So go back to the 5 modules, Phil. So these 5 modules map into, so in their course materials, they're mapping tasks, they're mapping content in each module into the domains in ECO. And there's a lot of new stuff. So there are a lot of new concepts, new terms, and things that are in these 5 modules that are not in the PMBOK guide. So I think it's going to be evolving, but this stuff, I think it's going to start appearing on the test. Some of these new concepts, these new terminologies. So my students in my PMP classes up to this point, I know it was fairly overwhelming for them just dealing with getting their arms around everything that we were teaching. The test has never, ever, ever been based purely on the PMBOK guide. It was based on the PMBOK guide plus other materials. And now they're upping the ante. So now, to me, from my perspective, it looks like they're almost doubling.
Oh my.
Almost doubling the amount of information the students are going to have to wrap their arms around to be ready for the test in January. So 50% of the test in come January is going to be on Agile, and 50% is going to be on predictive / hybrid. But also, there's going to be a lot of new stuff, I'm confident. Some of it, and it's not just Agile, but there's other new materials from those 5 modules that's going to be on the test. Version 7 then is also supposed to come out in either Q1, so sometime in Q1, maybe Q2. PMI is not quite promised, and that could augur in a lot of changes also. But I'm thinking that it might not bring about as much change as I was thinking some months ago, because they focused on the ECO. So even though they're coming out with a new PMBOK guide, the ECO is not going to change for probably another couple of years. They just updated the version of the ECO. So I think we might have a fairly stable ECO for at least 3 years. And I think the test is going to be focused on that and revolving around that, not the PMBOK guide as much anymore.
If I could say something, Aaron, you know, in those modules you showed, one of the things that upsets me when I look at it, it says keeping the business in mind.
Yeah.
At module 5.
Yeah, it should be first.
I mean, I know there has to be some sort of order to things, but I would say, particularly as an Agilist, but as a successful project manager for many huge projects, that it starts with keeping the business in mind, because how do you create value?
That's developed charter.
Business in mind. So it's very disturbing to me that that's module 5. Not that I wouldn't continue to learn and evaluate and look at changes and how to support the organization, but it's just very odd that that's the first time the business is noted.
Well, guess what? Go back to that slide again, Phil. Sorry. One more thing. The thing that gets, so this is all mishmash. Go back to the 5 modules. So in module 1, creating a high performing team, how the heck, so the first thing is build your team. How the heck do you know what skill sets are needed until you got requirements? How do you know? Start with this, and it's all an Agile concept too.
Yes, exactly.
It's all this theory Y type, you know, Agile ethos type stuff.
Mhm.
Well, wait a minute, if I'm in construction and I'm outsourcing everything to subcontractors, I'm not doing all that.
Exactly. Yep.
I'm not doing all that stuff. Oh, by the way, also they just go back and forth between knowledge areas and
Yeah.
processes of knowledge. So you're in creating high performing team, and one of the key tasks in there is negotiating. So we jump into contracts,
That's right.
and we
That's crazy.
blast through fixed price, cost reimbursable time and materials real quickly, but
That's
they
crazy.
don't mention like CPIF, cost plus incentive fee, fixed price.
Really,
So all that, it just all, we blast through it at the speed of
really.
light, real high level. They don't get into who has the risk in the different types of contracts, which is
Wow.
just so important. That's vital.
And
And
you
again,
know this firsthand because you've been through the training, Mark. You've been through the actual training that PMI has for the so-called instructors, right?
not for the instructors. I attended as a student.
Gotcha. Okay. So a student, but you've learned, you've seen the
I
material.
saw
And
them, yes.
let me be honest, from the material I've seen that has been shared, that I was able to see, a lot of errors.
Oh, a
It
lot of
doesn't
errors.
it doesn't correlate with the PMBOK guide. It's
Oh,
bad
no.
stuff.
And they make flat out mistakes. The people who wrote this, to me, I was wondering, could they pass the PMP? I mean, there's actually a slide where they did not get the 3 elements of the scope baseline correctly. They goofed it up. How could you do that? How can you
Yeah.
goof up what's the scope baseline?
That is crazy.
It brings me back to the thought of, when you go to make a change, one of the most important things is why. Simon Sinek's book, Start with Why.
Yes.
I think what we're missing here is why. Why are they doing this? If you gave me the why, maybe I can make some understanding of these things. That it just doesn't make sense to me.
Well, they forced the why, Susan. They forced it on us. They've told us that it's based on the role delineation study, and they claim to have surveyed their customers, and their customers are requesting that all training go through this process, this method.
Mark and I probably know well over 1,000 professionals. I mean, that's probably us, maybe 2,000. And then how many people they know? And we don't know one person who was asked. How is that possible? I mean, I'm actually connected with Jeff Sutherland on LinkedIn. We're not best buddies, but my network is pretty vast. I don't know one person that was asked. How is that possible? Do you know one person that was asked? I don't think they asked.
You know what else they did too here, Phil and Susan? There was a first. So in putting together this ECO, they went outside the project management community. They went and got opinions from especially HR people. So that makes, if you put those modules back up again, there's a lot of kind of just all focused on soft, kind of more HR. A lot of it is the soft HR stuff, and the harder stuff in risk, the harder stuff in scope, getting requirements got diluted, got watered down.
Look, Mark and Susan, we're going to have to come back and hit this really well again. We got this question on what should the PMP certification cover. Do you think that what it covers today is out of place, or do you think that it just needs to be scaled appropriately?
I think that one of the things I like about the PMP certification is you don't just pass an exam, you have to show experience.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really important for certification.
Mm-hmm.
I think in general, what it covers currently is valid. What I get concerned about is I feel like they tried to ask you trick questions.
Sure. and
figure out what are you going to get wrong. It's like they're more concerned about the bell curve and their pass fail rate than they are in assessing. So I do a lot of development of courses, both professional courses and university courses. So you have objectives and then you have assessments that match those objectives. I don't see that connection. Instead, I see how can we create a gotcha question, which by the way, even myself with years of experience, over 2 decades of experience and teaching people PMP for over 10 years, one of those gotcha questions might get me. What does
Me,
that
exactly.
mean? What does that mean? So to me, it's like, this shouldn't be about how do we get people to, hit a tough question. It should be, let's match the assessment with the objectives. That's just how you assess. And a certification is an assessment of a professional skill, and project management is a professional skill. And so I don't like to see an attempt to get a pass fail rate that they would like. I don't want a softball. So, you talk about like Scrum Alliances, Scrum Master. I know somebody who is in leadership, took the Scrum Master class, and she passed that. She has no idea of project management. Okay. And there's no fail rate on it. I don't know one soul that has failed the CSM. Okay.
True.
I don't think that's
True.
valuable from a cert perspective, but I also don't think you should just try every year to make questions that are harder and harder so people fail. Like that shouldn't be the point. So I think that the content that we've been teaching up till the 6th edition is the right content. I think they need to scale it back instead of adding all these little things that are not so important. And let the pass fail rate be what it is. Make sure that your assessment is level with your objectives. That's what an assessment is. Anything else is just some marketing ploy or business ploy, or maybe they're trying to make money off of retakes. I don't care, but it has nothing to do with project management. So, to be frank.
Thank you, Susan, for being so frank. So I'm quite aware of the time. I know our friends are kind of looking at the time as well. But Mark, let's journey back in our time machine to 1995. You were in this place taking your exam, and it's how many hours, and what did you have to do to pass it?
Oh gosh, so again, you guys don't care, but in 1995, they only gave the test, like I think 3 times a year in different major cities across the world. It was all manual. You didn't get your results for several months, for 2 months after you took the test, just in time to know if you had to take it again. And even though there were only 9 knowledge areas, I think you knew when you were doing a test question, you knew what knowledge area you were in, if you were in quality, if you were in cost. So you knew the knowledge area. So that made things a little easier. But there were 5 possible answers. It was all multiple choice, but there were 5 answers, and they tricked it up, and it was nasty, just like today. But it was even nastier in some ways. They would have 5 answers, so maybe A, B, C, D, E, and then you get down to D, and it would say A and B only, A and C, but not E.
Yeah,
So
I've took a certification recently that was like that. I was like, oh my gosh, to wrap your head around that.
Yeah. So
oh my God,
it had quite a reputation as being a super difficult test even at that time, and nothing of that has changed.
Tell us about
the
formulas.
one thing that I felt I got involved with the DC chapter, I guess, shortly after the test in '96, and got involved in the board. And I'll be honest with you, I was very proud of the chapter and what the chapter was doing. I felt their heart was in the right place. They were serving their community of project managers. They were trying to promote project management, promote and help PMI and promote the PMP. There weren't too many others. That might have been the only certification from PMI at the time, I think. But they were probably the CAPM came closely after that. They were promoting that. And I felt like global, so the headquarters in Philadelphia area, I felt like they too were, in concert with that they were a nonprofit, and they were working with the chapters, and we were all in this together and trying to do good, trying to promote. Project management is a fairly young profession, right? We're the accidental profession, right? We kind of started out as a team lead. I was an SME. I was a technical guy, an operating system specialist. And as the lead for my, a team, you keep getting assigned more management stuff, right? More project, and before you know it, lo and behold, you're a project manager. And so you kind of move into this accidentally. And so PMI was trying to put some good practices and structure around this. And I thought that was a good thing. And another thing, when I took the test, it opened my eyes to all sorts of new concepts and stuff. So at HP, we were really, really big on quality, but we had our own methodology. I didn't know anything about Six Sigma, or very little. I knew a little bit about ISO 9000. So it was eye-opening. I only worked on fixed price contracts in the commercial area. I knew nothing about cost plus incentive fee or cost plus award fee and stuff. Good. That was a good thing. It opened my eyes. And even though I knew I probably wasn't going to use much of that, it was still good to get exposure to it. So I kind of feel like they've lost their way, really lost their way a bit. And I hope, I hope that they get back to those basics and trying to serve. They got to figure out who are their customers. How do we really provide value? What is the real value that we could provide them? And I'm afraid there's too much profit motive in some of the things that they're doing right now.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I also think that they should be more reaching out to connecting with the PMI chapters as a vehicle to manage those stakeholders.
Grassroots.
Mark and I will both tell you, we have spent many an hour dedicating our free time, energy, and passion for project management in chapters, more than one chapter. And I also direct my students, my university students. I teach a lot of master's degree students, MBA students, and I direct them to get involved with their chapter so that they can have experience in project management. They can network. You should never network when you're looking for a job. You should network when you have one.
Exactly.
So that's a great place to network. And so I've continued to support that, but I feel like how PMI deals with this in the next 3 to 6 months, it may shift where I send my students to. I may not send them to the chapter if I feel like that isn't of value. And that would make me very upset, because like you, Phil, I like PMI. I mean, I've dedicated a lot of time, hours, energy, and I'm sad. And I mean, I guess nobody likes change that's imposed on them, but this is a particular example of not only have we not been engaged with it, but perhaps the change is not a change that meets the needs of the stakeholders, which then that's even worse than it being imposed on you and being something that actually could be good, to being something that is actually destroying the things that are of value to you. If PMI doesn't ask us what is valuable about the PMBOK guide, what is valuable about the certification, and they change it, and that change removes the things that are valuable to us, where are we left? What do we do? Where do we send professionals who want to learn about project management? I mean, Mark and I, we can continue to teach people best practices, things that we know work. I mean, fundamentally, your best practices, it's empirical. You do enough projects, and it all comes down to risk management, change management, stakeholder management. You need to think about quality. You need to plan scope. You need to estimate your schedule. You need to estimate your cost. But it's like, it's after a while, it all is kind of the same. But that's from empirical data, and that's the standard is a best practice based on empirical data. So you can't just say, well, we decided that this is now the best way to do it.
That's a good point.
It's not your decision to make. It's made empirically.
I'm writing that note down. The standard should be based on empirical data. So what is this effigy of greatness they're creating? It's like a shadow of the good times past that was actual data, that was empirical. This is going towards someone dreamt, oh, well, in order to make some more buck, why don't we do this? That's what it sounds like.
That's what it sounds like to me. And I don't, without knowing the purpose and without having a clear path. I mean, if anything, I like to look at this situation and say, what can I learn about it? What I can learn about it is this is why it's so important to listen to your stakeholders, engage them, understand your business, understand what's value and how what you're doing provides value to your customer. This is a perfect example. The best examples are the ones where things are not done well. Okay.
Yeah.
As instructors, I can't teach you so much from a project that's run well. I can teach you a lot from one that's not. It's not, I'm saddened by the fact that it's not, I still hold out hope that they fix it. I hope it's new Coke and they come back with classic Coke.
Yeah.
I really hope that, because I don't want to have to go figure out what's the new standard or best practice, because this isn't really one that's applicable anymore. I don't want them to make themselves insignificant or not valuable. I mean,
Absolutely. In trying to be a monopoly, they're going to make themselves an entity. And I keep saying it's not the Principal Management Institute, it's the Project Management Institute. The final question here, which Mark brought up, is what should the PMP exam really be? And I think we pretty much guided it down the path of what we're teaching, the 10 knowledges, the 5 process groups, that's good. Agile, of course, is here to stay. So those who are anti-agile need to also wake up and smell the coffee and embrace agile. I think the exam for the future needs to be based on real things that people need. Mark, any comments on this one
No.
before we round up? Well, let's go to our final page, Mark. So Susan, feel free to share your information because I've not included it on the final slide. So please, how can people get hold of you since the information is not up here? Email address, contact information, LinkedIn information. Can we find you on LinkedIn, Susan?
Yes, you can. You should be able to easily find me on LinkedIn under Susan Parente. It says that I'm in the DC area, so that should be some validation, and a picture that somewhat looks like me. I think my hair is pulled back. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Challenging for women with hairstyles. And there's a bridge in the background. But if you see a Susan Parente in DC, that should be me. And yeah, great. Thank you for that. And I have a website, but I don't use that a whole lot. So, and if you can't find me in one of those ways, you can reach out to Mark. You should be able to find me, and yourself too. You'll help somebody out if they need to.
Absolutely. I will definitely link anyone up with you. And Mark, we got your information on the screen, the horizon-pmtraining.com, and they can reach you at that email, correct?
Right, correct.
Okay, and
if you got an email if you didn't get her, she did put up her email real quick in the chat window a minute ago. So maybe Susan put that back up again. But if you send an email, you want to get hold of Susan, just send it to my email. I will forward it to her.
Gotcha. Okay. And there's the information for Praizion, Praizion.com. You can email support@praizion.com. I want to say a huge thank you to our guests, Susan, Mark, and everyone else who has joined, who is still here. I know some folks had to dash off, but we've still got Angela, Cesar, David, James, Johannes, and Daryl, and anyone else who came through. Thank you very much. We're going to stop the recording formally for now, but we're going to do open mic and get any additional questions, but officially we are going to end the recording. So thank you very much, and we'll do this again. This is just episode 1 of probably 3 or 4. So
thank you.
Great, Phil. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Everybody had really great questions too. So, and look forward to some more here after the recording. Thank you.
Thank you.